We will get started in just about a second. I'm watching the numbers next to the participants start to roll up, so we'll get started in just another minute.
Great. Fred, I'm quoting you so often. It's great to be on a call with you, but I do use some of those quotes of yours. They're quite good.
You're very kind, and I remember having the chance to speak at UMBC at the induction ceremony. We had a
absolutely
important time together. And Sue, I've not been on your campus since my daughter was a candidate for admission. And so before you worry about whether she was accepted or not, I'll tell you she applied early to someplace closer to home. So Macalester, but we were very taken with Macalester.
Good. It's a special place.
All right. Well, as people join us, why don't we get started? Please welcome back to the 46th Triennial of the Phi Beta Kappa Society. I'm Fred Lawrence, the Secretary and CEO of the Phi Beta Kappa Society. We are on the final day of our 4-day triennial, the first ever remote triennial for Phi Beta Kappa. We've been doing triennials since the first one back in 1883, but this is our first remote one, and it is wonderful to have as many of you joining us now as are coming online. It is almost a cliche to say that this has been a challenging time for higher education, to say that it is a time of both challenges and opportunities. But as universities and colleges and their administration look ahead, it is hard not to think of a time of a enormous public health challenge, unlike anything in a century, of a economic turmoil and roller coaster, unlike anything in 3/4 of a century, and a racial reckoning, unlike anything in half a century. All of these giving challenges, but yes, opportunities for higher education. On top of all this, questions about what is the continued relevance of the liberal arts and sciences? What is the reputation, if you will, the brand of the liberal arts and sciences in so many constituencies, among our students, among our communities, our administrative leaders in our country, in our states, in our localities, in our businesses? We are fortunate to be joined by visionary academic leaders today to join in conversation about these topics. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to engage with Sue Rivera and Freeman Herbowski, one longtime friend, one new friend, but two major voices in the academy today. So, one quick housekeeping note for our audience. Given a very full agenda, I think we just got met by our third panelist, Gabi. Thank you for joining us. Gabi Star joining us from out in Pomona. So we've now got a full house, and I can say 3 visionary voices on the issues that we're going to be talking about. And if my crack staff is added, I do believe that your name is going to change. There it does. It just came up. Very good. The housekeeping note that I was going to give real quickly is that given the topics we want to cover, we're not going to be able to take questions from the audience. However, I do encourage you to use the chat function to share resources and exchange ideas with your fellow attendees, just as people have been doing right throughout the triennial all week long. So let me introduce our panelists and then turn to the issues of the day. I'll begin with Freeman Herbowski, the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Freeman is a scholar himself in the area of science and math education, special emphasis on inclusive excellence and performance. I'm just going to share some of his many accomplishments. He chaired President Obama's Presidential Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. He chaired the National Academies Committee that produced the report Expanding Underrepresented Minority Participation, America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads. He was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. He was one of the America's best leaders, as ranked by U.S. News and World Report. I've got my own views about rankings of U.S. News and World Report, but they did get this one right by saying he was one of America's best leaders. He received TIAA-CREF's Theodore Hesburgh Award for Leadership, Carnegie Corporation's Academic Leadership Award, and others. He's been elected to membership in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. He is a proud honors graduate of what was then called Hampton Institute, now called Hampton University, but he would know it as the Little College by the Sea. Gorgeous, gorgeous campus in Hampton, Virginia, with high honors in mathematics, got his MA in mathematics and PhD in higher education administration and statistics from the University of Illinois, Champaign and Urbana. Also a great friend of Phi Beta Kappa. Freeman, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Suzanne Rivera is the president of Macalester College, where she's a professor of public affairs. She's an accomplished leader, instructor, researcher, and scholar, advocate for social justice, and brings a strong commitment to inclusion and equity in her role as president. She is a national expert in research ethics. Has published numerous articles, essays, and book chapters that explore the moral dimensions of informed consent, the use of human specimens, and protection of research subject privacy. Her research has received funding from the NIH, the NSF, the Office of Research Integrity from Health and Human Services, and the Cleveland Foundation. She was previously the Vice President for Research and Technology Management and a faculty member in the Department of Bioethics at Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio. Sue's bachelor's degree was in American Civilization from Brown University, a master's degree in social work from UC Berkeley, and a PhD in public policy from UT Dallas. Sue, thank you for being with us today. And last, and certainly not least, Gabi Star joining us from California, where she is the president of Pomona College and a highly regarded scholar of English literature whose work reaches into neuroscience and the arts. She's a national voice on access to college for students of all backgrounds, the future of higher education, women in leadership, and the importance of the arts. She recently served on the California Higher Education Recovery with Equity Task Force, which was charged with envisioning a new approach for post-secondary education preparation and workforce readiness as the state recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. She's a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, author of 2 books, and offers a compelling case for working across academic disciplines to spark intellectual discovery, a point of personal pride for us here at Phi Beta Kappa. Her wonderful book, Feeling Beauty, The Neuroscience of Aesthetic Experience, MIT Press in 2013, was a finalist for our Christian Gauss Award for Outstanding Books in Literary Scholarship or Criticism. Gabi's bachelor's and master's degree in women's studies were from Emory, and her doctorate in English and American literature is from Harvard. Gabi, welcome, and it's good to have all of you with us. Eastern seaboard, central part of the country, and out west. Glad to have you all here. So let's jump right in. And I think anyone who was listening to those introductions was struck by the sheer power of the interdisciplinary work that each of you has been involved in, cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary. So let me start by asking how each of you thinks about interdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity as a way of dealing with the grand challenges that we're looking at right now on our college campuses. I want to start, Sue, with you, and then Gabi, your research explicitly draws on cross-disciplinary perspectives, and Freeman, who was described in a recent Sun profile as a true polymath, is Mr. Interdisciplinarity. So let's, Sue, let me start with you on this question of how does this give us a window into the issues that we're facing today?
Thanks, Fred. And it's an honor to participate today. I want to thank you for including me, and I'm delighted to be here with Freeman and Gabi, 2 people from whom I always learn whenever I hear them talk. So this is a real delight. To answer your question, it's clear to me, even before the pandemic, it was clear, but maybe it's come into sharper focus, that the thorny challenges we're facing, not just in this nation, but globally, require cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches. You know, there might have been a time where a single researcher working alone could make a discovery or an invention that would solve an important problem. But I feel like in today's environment, all the big challenges, global health, social inequality, climate change, violence and conflict, these are complex problems that require solutions drawing from different disciplinary traditions. And they also require people working together. not only across academic disciplinary lines, but across other differences of experience and perspective. So to me, this makes the kind of education provided on a liberal arts and sciences campus especially relevant, especially timely, because we're providing students with tools, not just facts, right? But also tools like critical analysis, effective persuasion, problem solving, teamwork with people who bring very different lived experiences. And I don't think the seemingly intractable problems or challenges we're facing now can be addressed or solved without the interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approaches our campuses are best positioned to teach.
I had a teacher who used to say that that we are disciplinary because we need structures within our universities, but the world is not disciplinary.
Right.
The world doesn't come with those with departments and structures. Problems don't come with departments and structures. We bring those to it, and then we have to try to figure out how to respond to that. Gabi, how would you build on what Sue said?
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing us together. It is a pleasure to see you, Fred, and to see Sue and Freeman. And I just want to start off by telling a very, very short, two very short stories. The first is how I met Freeman, which was I was the Dean of the College of Arts and Science at NYU, and the then President John Sexton said, we need to figure out how we're going to up our game in teaching the sciences. And so I want you to take a team down to University of Maryland, Baltimore County and meet President Hrabowski and do a tour and look at what his team is doing, and you tell me what you can bring back here. And what they were doing there was problem-based collaboration. I was specifically looking at the physics and the organic chemistry classes. And it was going to that point that nothing is a single person or a single discipline. That pedagogy was students around a table with a graduate student or a senior student or the professor. Everyone took turns doing part of the same of the problem. And so everyone had something to bring. And what that fundamentally was about was the idea that collaboration is going to be crucial to solving whatever problem it is, whether it's your organic chemistry problem set or it's something like Ebola. And I met Sue soon after she arrived. We'll talk a little bit about this later, the Liberal Arts College Racial Equity Alliance, but a lot of us were in the wake of the tragic murder of George Floyd, really trying to think about the role of colleges and universities and promoting racial justice. And I met Sue. And the third thing that I'll say about this is one of the things that liberal arts colleges do incredibly well is that in part because of our scale, but in part because of the collaborative teaching methods we employ, we make things smaller. We make communities of people smaller. And so the fact that I know Freeman and Sue is in some ways, absolutely contingent on a set of historical circumstances that touched us individually in different ways, but it is because we were put in positions where we knew we had to collaborate. And above all else, I think the liberal arts ethos is one in which you value the input of everyone in a room, whatever discipline they bring, whatever background they have, and you learn to work together. And that is what I think we do, bar none, on our campuses. And that's what the world needs now more than just about anything else.
So both Macalester and Pomona have the advantage of being private schools on the smaller side and that kind of intimacy that Gabi's talking about. I know two of my colleagues in my years at Brandeis who did some very important work in neurobiology will tell you in all sincerity, two women neurobiologists who met at their kids' soccer game. And they talked a little bit of soccer and they watched the kids and they said, so what are you working on? And what are you working on? And by the time the soccer game was over, he said, we got to get back together tomorrow. And this whole new project came out of that. Happenstance, I don't know, coincidence is God's way of saying anonymous. But Freeman, you've got a different challenge. You're not at a small private campus. So how do you, apparently John Sexton thought you were the place to go to learn about this method. But same question, how does interdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinarity get brought to bear, and particularly in a, not huge, but a large scale public university? How do you deal with that?
So let me start by saying that Gabi and I are both from the Deep South. She is from Atlanta originally, and I'm from Birmingham. And we Southerners have to be personal as we talk before we get into the subject. So first of all, I'm very proud of you, Sue, and what you're doing, and so glad to see you again. And I claim Gabi as a mentee, and I've been following her quite a bit. And I would start with this, Fred, that the liberal arts, generally, when we think about studying the liberal arts, we're thinking about how to help people think broadly and provocatively, how to raise questions all the time. Hrabowski, a Nobel laureate in physics, once said that when he was growing up in in New York, all of his friends' mothers would ask them, "What'd you learn in school today?" He said, "But my mother would say, 'Did you ask a good question?'" He said, "My Jewish mother would ask, 'Did you ask a good question today?'" And so what we should be about today is, what are the questions that we should ask? And I want to start with one that's fairly provocative, and that is that I am a bit bothered, in the spirit of collegiality, by the notion of the liberal arts and sciences. And I'll tell you why I'm bothered. The liberal arts will include always not only the humanities and the social sciences, but math and science. And when we say the liberal arts and sciences, it almost seems as if we're bifurcating. We are suggesting, well, here are the liberal arts, people in humanities and social sciences, and then over here are the sciences. And that is not true. So I want to challenge Phi Beta Kappa to think about, if we want to talk about arts and sciences, that's fine. But when we say the liberal arts and sciences, and I thought about this, and so much that I got one of my classicists and said, "Tell me where I'm wrong." And he said, "No, you're right. When you think about the quadrivium and the trivium, you're talking about these different parts." So we know that. But when we give into the notion of the liberal arts and sciences, we are buying into the notion that the sciences are different from the liberal arts. So I'd like us to think about that in the language that we use. I think it's very important. It seems minor, but the reason it's so important, it goes to your question and my answer. We tend to find that there is an us versus them culture on our campuses. There are very few people with a policy kind of background, as Sue has, that brings in interdisciplinarity. Oh my God, that Gabi, with her genius, brings together neuroscience and literature. People want to know, how is that possible to even talk about that? I mean, so they are real exceptions. I'm a mathematician, and at the same time, the child of an English teacher. So I was always looking at the relationship between literature and philosophy and math. But I am suggesting that on our campus, we have these conversations about, first of all, what areas are included in the liberal arts. And so even when we talk about engineering, we look at what they have in accreditation about how they should be grounded in the liberal arts, in math and science and history and English in those areas. And I would suggest that what we're doing right now is to use the problems of society that are so visible right now, from the public health crisis and COVID, to social justice issues, to climate change, to the economic disparities in our society, and to say we will not solve those problems through any one discipline, that it will take moving through those areas. And I've got all kinds of examples. I'll just give you one very quickly. Languages. We are still we are a public research university with students from 100 countries, and half my students have a parent from another country. Literally the Baltimore, Washington corridor, then from New York and everything. But I tell you that because people criticize us because we still require a language. Most campuses in the country don't require a language. We think it's very important to do that. And that means language and culture, which gets us to the idea of the interdisciplinarity and understanding more about the world, not just from the American perspective, but from the global humankind perspective. Let me stop there with just some thoughts.
Great thoughts. Gabi, please.
Quickly,
Please.
to what Freeman was saying. One of the things that I think is really important, and I think this is important for every student in the liberal arts, but I think it may be particularly important for first generation and underrepresented minority students. I tell my students, I do not want you to limit yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Because there are plenty of people in the world who will want to limit you. Why help them out?
Yes.
To
Mhm.
begin with, please do not tell me ever again, and try not to think ever again, that you are not X kind of person. I'm not a literature kind of person. I'm not a
Right.
science kind of person. I don't do math. I
Yes,
don't, I can't no, you're a human being.
yes.
All of this knowledge was invented by humankind, which means you can do it. And I think that is following on Freeman's and Sue's points. That is the thing that we must do, is encourage students to and our colleagues as well, because we can get so caught up in our own expertise, to realize that this thing and this thing can solve problems outside of the disciplines you've been taught.
Yes.
And when I say to my colleagues, I don't say it so much as Pomona as I have it at other places, but I say, you have a PhD, which is by nature a research degree, which means you can read a book.
Yeah.
And if you don't know it, you can go figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's what we want our students to be able to do. They don't know everything, but they need the tools to figure it out. They need not to be self-limiting.
Well, Gabby, you're actually, taking me onto to something that I want us to talk about now, sort of expressly, beyond the students, all the different constituencies that a university, a college president has to talk to. In some ways, the hardest thing to communicate to someone who's never sat there is how big that 360 feels. It feels like a 540 or a 720 sometimes, or it's three-dimensional, whatever the right metaphor is. So yes, it's students, but it's parents, it's policymakers, it's employers, it's the communities that you dwell in. So how do you think about communicating the value of liberal arts and sciences to that wide range of constituents? And Gabby, I'm starting with you, because I'm thinking about the humanities studio at Pomona that you launched as an initiative to support research and engagement with the humanities. This is the classic, but what are you going to do with an anthropology degree? What are you going to do with a philosophy degree? So the students, my experiences tend to get that. What you just said lands with them. How about those other constituencies?
I can't take credit for Humanities Studio. That was my colleague, Kevin Detmar. That's his baby. I just said, this is a great idea, and I advocated for it with funders, and Mellon was very generous in funding it. The very first year, so the Humanities Studio was meant to be a writing and public humanities combination. So faculty get time to write as a group, and they have students who partner with them. It's a group of faculty and students who intensely write together. And they are, reading to each other, they're working with each other, their express brief is to try and translate what they're doing for other people. The why. When Kevin started it, he explicitly did not restrict membership in the Humanities Studio to humanities and arts faculty and students. So the very first class of faculty and staff included a mathematician who also is a poet. It included, folks from anthropology, all across the college. And when I try to get people to understand, I'm a Southerner. Southerners tell stories. Sometimes they aren't so much interesting as they are long. This one will be short. If you go back 13, 14 years to the Ebola crisis, the last big Ebola crisis, and I tell this story all the time to parents and my trustees and my alumni. When people thought that wasn't solved by a vaccine, that sure as heck wasn't solved by closing borders, wasn't solved by quarantine, wasn't really solved by doctors. There's a little known fact that I will now out, that there were only 2 doctors in New York City who agreed to treat Ebola patients. I know one of them by name, I won't say who, and I don't know who the other ones, but only 2. That turned out to be a nursing disease. It really needed intensive nursing. But what stopped Ebola in West Africa was anthropology. It wasn't public health tracking and tracing. What happened was someone, some set of people at the WHO, the UN, the variety of folks from all around the world, US included, who came in to try and stop Ebola. Some one or ones of them realized that every major religion in West Africa requires as its final right the washing of the body of the dead. That was the vector that spread Ebola from person to person, that last act of love and duty. And so the intervention that stopped Ebola was introducing bowls that had bleach in them, a bleach and water solution, so that people who came to visit the families of the dead or the funerals and the services of the dead, in which they would touch the body and acknowledge the passing of a loved one, could wash their hands and disinfect them before and after they left. No amount of vaccine was going to get at that. Not as quickly as that simple thing. So the knowledge that we get from studying humanity and all of humanity, not just some of humanity, is the only thing that will stop a crisis. That it scared the hooey out of every human being on this planet. It was humanistic knowledge.
Practical problem, as practical and as impactful as it could possibly be. A medical problem, quote unquote, and a solution that comes through a combination of anthropology and faith and intervention and nursing all combined. Freeman, I take your challenge to me, as you always do, your challenge to me about just saying liberal arts, not liberal arts and sciences seriously. I will just tell you, we think about this all the time, and the vocabulary I have taken to using is that when we say liberal arts and sciences, I know that all the people in the room who really know what the liberal arts are view that as redundant, because the liberal arts includes math and astronomy and biology and chemistry and physics. But having said all that, the reason I say it is that we do live in a time when you say liberal arts and people think humanities and maybe social sciences, maybe not. Now you fight against that all the time. You are kind of you're considered a STEM champion, you're a STEM guy, and yet I've never heard you talk where you don't immediately pivot into the liberal arts and pivot into the humanities. But UMBC is so well known for producing graduates, and particularly graduates of color, in advanced work and research in the sciences. So how do you sell that whole package as a picture of what you're doing at UMBC?
You know, the most important point to me about this entire conversation is that we are looking in the mirror at ourselves to say, from our own campus's points of view, and you, Fred, what is this value of the liberal arts? And quite frankly, how do we help the public understand, through examples of the kind Gabi just gave, just how important humanistic studies are to all of us in what we do? I have to tell you that I'm telling every audience that we are so proud of Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who is the first Black woman in the world to create a vaccine. What people don't know, she's one of our graduates who went on to Chapel Hill, was at NIH, she's now just gone to Harvard. But the point is, she majored in sociology and biology. This is what I want to say. And she makes the point that it was the work with sociocultural issues in Baltimore City that helped her understand what she wanted to do and the important role that behavior and attitudes and levels of trust will have on what happens to people. And so after she had created that mRNA with Dr. Graham as leading that committee, that group, what's significant is that she was concerned that all the testing was being done and very few Blacks were in the tests. And she was able to use that grounding in the social sciences to talk about why people didn't trust, but how we had to not accept the idea that Blacks wouldn't be in the test. This is why she got me to be in it and so many other people. But it was that notion of building trust that was really important. Now, what is the larger point I'm making? It is that we have to help the public understand that what happens in our institutions as students are preparing for leadership, what happens in their exposure to broad liberal arts will have a direct impact on our society. The example I give to college presidents all the time is that almost everybody in Congress is a graduate of one of our institutions. And the question is, are people in Congress talking to each other? And they came from the finest of universities in the country. And the other one I give that really upsets people, but I think the liberal arts should be there to upset people, because it's only when you're somewhat upset that you begin to think differently. You know, the Library of Congress, you know, has its foundation from the Library of Thomas Jefferson, who was considered by far the most broadly educated person in our country. We still say that. I mean, his understanding of culture, of art, of engineering, of other areas. And yet he didn't free his slaves, even his children, until after he died. And when people make the comment, well, it was because of his times, no, there were slaveholders who did free themselves in Virginia. So what is my point? It is not to degrade him. He did so much for our country. It is to say that why is it that we consider the liberal arts that experience that gets us to rethink the way we believe everything? And yet what we see, many people, many from the most prestigious of universities with a liberal arts degree who have drawn conclusions that many of us have real problems with. And to me, that is the larger question that we all have to think about. How can we get that 30–40% of people who are not in line with the idea of people having the right to vote, those kinds of things? What can we do on our campuses to help people from all kinds of political backgrounds to look at what's important to human beings as we think about immigration, as we think about health disparities and those issues? And so what we've been doing is talking about those issues with not just people who agree with us, but with people who don't, because our campus is a microcosm of our state. And while it is a fairly liberal state, 30–40% of the students are from very homogenous environments, and they are very uncomfortable with what people who are liberal would say. And so we are working very hard with people from different political parties. In our Center for Democracy, we have a Mellon grant on, it focused on inclusive excellence, the humanities and excellence, working in the larger community. We also have a great participation in the program Imagining America, which is a great consortium of universities looking at ways that artists and humanists and scholars can work with campus, with communities and activists in solving those problems. And so my final point is this, that somehow we are much too comfortable in our discussion about the liberal arts, because we know it teaches us to write well and to speak well and to think critically. And using your argument to be, here's the part that you make, Fred, that is so important. Are we teaching students to listen to the other point of view? Are we helping them understand the importance of evidence? How do we keep people calm when they hear things that are very offensive to them, to see how we move towards the common ground? That's where, from my perspective, we have not succeeded in the liberal arts, in the academy, in our country. And that's where we have to go. How do we help people, our colleagues and students and the public, to listen to other points of view, to find that common ground?
That same kind of intimacy that Gabi was talking about in the small liberal arts college and in a
Yes.
school like Macalester as well. If in some ways, the whole excuse for the small liberal arts college is precisely that you come into close, intimate contact and confrontation with people of different backgrounds, different views. That's what the whole project is supposed to be about. Sue, when I think about the work that you've done at Macalester, one of the things I think about is so much of the work aimed at first generation students. How in particular to them, and I'm really now thinking of their parents, do you pitch the idea of the liberal arts and sciences? I had so many conversations with students who said, you know, I'm taking an art history class and I love it, but I can't tell my parents. Right? They want me to come here and be an engineer. They want me to come here and be a doctor. That's why I was sent to this college. So how do you have the liberal arts discussion over the shoulder of that first generation student to where she or he is coming from?
It's really important, maybe now more than ever, because probably all the people in the audience today know that the population of traditional college age students in the US is becoming more and more first gen. And that's even a term we didn't have when I first went to college 35 years ago, you know, and people who didn't have parents who were college educated had to navigate the so-called hidden curriculum of higher education. Back then, poor students and first gen students tried very hard to assimilate and survive without any of the pride that comes from the recognition we now give to students who arrive at college having traveled a longer kind of emotional or material distance than other students, you know, who were not born on third base. And so now we laud our Pell Grant recipients and our first gen students for their tenacity and what some people might call grit, or what in Spanish, what we might call ganas, that it takes for them to get there. But we do have to recognize that these students arrive with a kind of pressure on them that other students don't have. Their families are relying on them. Their parents are relying on them to professionalize, because it's going to help the whole family and maybe even the community in some bigger ways. So what we're trying to do at Macalester is recognize and appreciate the strengths that first-gen students bring to our campus, and be honest and say, we know this place wasn't originally made with you in mind. We want to become the kind of place where every student can thrive. And to that end, we're looking at all the kinds of barriers, not just material barriers like food insecurity or the cost of books and art supplies, but also the emotional barriers like not being able to ask parents for advice, or being shy about telling parents, I really love the theater. I think I might like to be a drama major. And we're saying we know there's pressure when you're the first to go to college, to go for a kind of technical certification and to get a job that will uplift your family, because that pressure is real and I understand it. So I think it's our job to articulate a value proposition to those students and their parents. And as Gabi said before, we don't want any of our students to feel limited. We want them to come feast on all the ideas we can teach them about, whether in philosophy or anthropology or physics or theater or gender studies or math or poetry or whatever, and help them find their passion. They deserve the same freedom to find their passion as students who are not first gen. So we want to say to our first gen students, the liberal arts are here for you too. You deserve to be here. You can have a meaningful career and a life of the mind. Those are not mutually exclusive concepts. And actually, we need you here. You make us better. And even further, we will help you choose your path. You can become a scholar and still pay rent. You can create new knowledge. You can solve real world problems. You have that power, and we're here to support you on that journey. But I don't blame students for being skeptical. And I think the onus is on us to explain to them why all of that is possible and necessary.
Yeah, I love that. The onus is on us. That idea of saying you can be a scholar and pay rent, and those are two important things. We all too often have a tendency to say, worry about being a scholar, the rent will take care of itself. That's not their experience. That's actually patronizing to say that.
Yep.
And by validating that that's a legitimate concern, as is the other piece of this. I want to talk a little bit about something that we've been talking about throughout the triennial and actually throughout the past years, and will continue to, and that's the notion that's usually described as inclusive excellence. You'll forgive me, but I think inclusive excellence is another one of those redundant terms. I think it's just excellence. But I think you know what I mean when I say inclusive excellence. And this is particularly relevant for Phi Beta Kappa because, what we do, among other things, we do a lot of different work, but one of the things we do that we're probably best known for is recognizing the most accomplished students in the liberal arts and sciences on our 293 chapters, I can now say, with our 3 new chapters elected yesterday. So, and how we do that becomes terribly important for how we represent excellence to this society. So Freeman, let me start with you this round. This is an issue I know you've thought about at great length and with great depth. So talk to us a little bit about inclusive excellence, and is it a redundant expression that we ought to be working out of the vocabulary?
No, I don't see it as redundant in the way I see the sciences being added to the liberal arts. I'm going to say that again.
Right. You stay on message.
And let me be a little cynical, because we added sciences on because we thought we needed to do that to give it more credibility, and that's a problem. I want you to think about that. That's a problem. Okay. It really is, because it makes people think, well, it's not related, it's not relevant if you don't have that science in there. But that's for another day. You are an attorney, so you understand my going back to those arguments. But when it comes to inclusive excellence, the fact is that I think it's reinforcing the idea of excellence for everyone, for all groups. Right now, when we think about excellent scientists, we have a picture of someone in mind. It's not my student who created the technology for the vaccine. It's not a young Black woman. It is not. Right? And our society needs to be reminded in many ways that we can find examples of excellence in all groups, quite frankly, and that we should be working to bring people first generation college, women, people of color, people from other countries, as we think about ways of having the highest levels of achievement in our society. And right now we're not there. And I think in the spirit of that book I mentioned, my book, The Empowered University, Empowered to Look in the Mirror itself, let's look at the professoriate. in our universities and universities in general, colleges and universities. And let's ask the question, do we reflect humankind and what we see in our country? And for the most part, we don't. We will have somebody who's over diversity. But when you look at the people who are in leadership positions, what you find is too few women, and certainly too few people of color, and really too few Blacks and Latinx. We know that. And it doesn't change overnight, but it's really hard to change the culture of a university. I think we can use the liberal arts in talking about what culture means as we think about our attitudes and our values and our assumptions and the ways we give people incentives to do certain things. And so right now we should be embarrassed as the academy in our country that we have produced so few people of color who are on the faculties and moving into academic administrative types of positions. We should certainly be embarrassed. My campus has been working on that in many ways. Our STRIDE program to produce more Black faculty, and we're still at the best in the arts and humanities and social sciences, we may be 11% Black. The student body is closer to 20%, for example. So we have a way to go. I think we start by everybody admitting we have a long way to go. Number two, the new study on presidents, looking at what they think about social justice, they're thinking things are going fairly well, but that's because we don't see in the media protests every day. As soon as we start seeing more protests, and they will come because we still have this structural racism, all the campuses will again be saying, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? But it's unfortunate that somehow our liberal arts education has not taught us that we shouldn't have to wait for a crisis to work on issues of inclusive excellence. That is, it is the right thing to do. It is a way of bringing the voices of people who've not been heard. That's when I think about inclusive excellence, I think about bringing in those voices. For a long time, women, people of color who've not been at the table as we are making decisions and planning our future. We need so much more of that. And I would argue that the liberal arts faculty broadly should be champions of diversity and inclusive excellence, not just what happens on the outside, but what happens on our campuses. And that means every colleague looking in the mirror, looking in the department. Who is in the department right now? And this is, and my colleagues are working on it, but we are the first to say we have a long way to go. And I would say that's what we have to start with, the fact that we are much better than we are right now. We can be much better than we are right now. That must be the kind of mantra.
I mean, it's sort of a truism that you can't solve a problem until you admit that it's a problem, but it got to be a truism for a reason, because there's a fundamental, power to that insight, and the acknowledgement of the problem may come from the street. It's in our interest that it not have to come from the street. I mean, that dream deferred will find its way if you don't anticipate. And what your suggestion is, the academy has got a very important role in that.
Fred. T.S. Eliot once said, one of the characters in the book said, he had the experience but missed the point. So we've been having the experiences. We've heard our students telling us what they don't see on our campuses. Somehow we are missing the point. And the people in the liberal arts should be getting the point. The point is we have to act differently and bring about other results.
So Gabi and then Sue, I want to ask you guys to talk a little bit about the Liberal Arts College's Racial Equity Leadership Alliance work that you've been doing, and in particular on this idea of inclusive excellence. Suppose that that someone listening hears what Freeman just said and says, yes, that's right, we're on board, you want to do that. So what are the resources? What do you advise? Where do they, I don't want to say begin as in a sense, that nothing's happening. I don't mean that, but what are the next steps and what are the next resources that you tell them? So let me start with Gabi and then Sue.
So the first thing that I want to say is again, two quick stories. I get very frustrated when I talk to hiring committees. This has not happened at my time at Pomona, I will say. I get very frustrated when in the past I've talked to hiring committees or chairs and they've said, there's just no one. There's no Black political scientist. There's no Black physicist. I'm like, I saw 3 on Nova last week. So stop telling me this. There's a whole association of Black political scientists. You can find it on the internet. So you just aren't looking. But more than that, one of the things about equal opportunity, is that equal opportunity says you need to match the available pool. And I ask you, who creates the available pool of PhDs? Is it a grocery store? No, it's us. So it's on us. We are the ones who have failed to do this. It is not someone else's responsibility. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll say, not to name any names, is I've been to some relatively elite institutions. If we're relying on those elite institutions to solve our diversity problems, we'll be waiting until the cold icebergs from the underworld pierce the ground on which we stand. Because, you know, we reproduce ourselves. That's what academics are really good at. So we shouldn't be going to the same wells and assuming that they'll have different water. So how do we solve that problem? Again, looking at one of the reasons John Sexton sent me to Freeman, and one of the reasons I brought that up is I'm saying, look, we actually have a small world we live in. It's not a coincidence that the three presidents sitting on here who are Black and brown know each other. And it's not because all Black and brown people know each other. It's because we were given mentorship by people who mentored more than one of us.
Yes.
And we were given mentorship in that by generous people, whether they were white or Black or male or female or whatever gender. So we are here because people acted for us to help us, with us. So you have to be that person. You can't expect somebody else to be that person. So the liberal arts racial equity alliance, we're just getting, off. We've got several new presidents who are part of it. But what we believe as a group is that we need to create coalitions if we're going to produce something useful. We're small places, Susan and mine. We can do what we can do, but we can do a heck of a lot more together. And if we're talking about creating the pipeline we need, which is the only way it's going to happen, we have to do it together, which means we have to have our students talking together. We have to have our faculty talking to our students so they'll see the talent. We're not going to be able to do it because we're doing it for ourselves. I'm going to have to do it so that Sue can find people, so that Freeman can find people, so that FSU can find people. So we need to be able to pool together all of the programs that we have for training, all of the pipelines that we are building, and make out of that a single unit that is acting with our hands together. Otherwise, we will be doomed. We will be picked off one by one because sometimes out of ill intent, but sometimes because there was one person on one campus who was just pushing and then they retired. I'm lucky on my campus is one of my colleagues, Joe Harden, who's on this call right now, who has been co-leading an inclusive excellence teaching initiative in which faculty are supporting each other. And then what I hope they'll do is that then they'll share that. And that's one of the things LaCrela is trying to do, build databases of best practices, get people from Macalester and Bates and Carleton and Spelman and everywhere else sharing that knowledge so we don't have to reinvent the wheel and then throw up our hands and say, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. Really? It's been a while. You don't have an excuse not to know now.
Sue?
Yeah, I want to jokingly say I violently agree with my two colleagues here. I echo everything they have to say. I like Gabi, I am excited about LaCrela because I always love a coalition approach to making change. I think, we go farther together and these small colleges have something unique to say and we should be champions for change. And I think we can be more effective if we work as a team. But I also think that there's just so much work to be done to increase equity and justice in our country and in our world that there is not just one solution. Each of us needs to assign ourselves the job of being the chief equity and inclusion officer in every room we're in every meeting we attend, in everything we do all the time. It's got to be everybody's job.
Yes.
The one thing I challenge myself to do when I'm walking around campus is pick up litter whenever I see it,
Yeah.
and sort of make a point of putting it in a trash can. And partly it's a pet peeve because of my age. I just give a hoot, don't pollute, got ingrained in me when I was a little kid, and I just do that. But I also feel like I want to say through my actions that everyone needs to bring not only their head and their heart to work, but their hands too. We all have to do this work together.
Yes.
I do think that there are big knowledge gaps we still need to address. And as you've already heard Gabi and Freeman say, one of them is that the focus has been so much on student diversity and inclusion that I think we've neglected, maybe out of self-preservation, questions about belonging and thriving among our faculty and staff. I agree with Freeman that we need to look at ourselves hard in the professoriate and in academic leadership and then the communities we lead, and make strides to assure that we really are attending to the flourishing of the people who we charge with teaching and supporting our young adult students. It's all well and good for faculty and staff to say they champion diversity, but are they really sharing power? Are they really making space for new colleagues? Are they modeling the behavior we want our students to practice? Are they still treating tenure like it's a hazing process that's just geared toward replicating the professoriate of the 1950s? You know, are we still using the concept of so-called rigor as some kind of elitist cudgel to exclude people who don't come from the fanciest places? These are uncomfortable questions to ask, but I totally agree with Gabi and Freeman that it's on us. We have to hold ourselves accountable to start asking these questions and to sit with the discomfort of the answers.
Fred, I'm sorry, you made the mistake of putting 3 presidents in. We just jump in all the time.
No. That wasn't a mistake, my friend. That was a plan.
Let me tell you, I mean, I'm so impressed with the things that my colleagues are saying. You know, we would all agree that we have many wonderful faculty members on our campuses who want to do the right thing. But the question is, what does doing the right thing mean? What is the commitment we have to make? How do we stop using the language we've used before we can't find anyone? I mean, we have to talk about the creative ways that we can find people. Sue, in my early years as president, and this was almost 30 years ago, I would go around picking up paper, and the Blacks would come up to me and say, you're the president, you can't be picking up paper. And I would say to my students, Black, white, and others, so are we thinking we are better than the grounds people? I mean, that we just drop things. I mean, talk about what does it mean to be in the liberal arts? I mean, how do you care about people? You know, we're not there to have our slaves come by and pick up paper behind us, right? And so if we can teach through the liberal arts in many ways, but I would say to you, we have made a decision some years ago. We made the decision that we wanted to produce PhDs in science and MD PhDs of color, in addition to the other students who would go to the faculties. And so we now have people at MD Anderson, to Stanford, to Harvard now, to a lot at Duke, UAB. We have been working to do that in political science at Brandeis, at Georgetown, Blacks, right? So, I mean, when you think about the people of color and students in general who go to the liberal arts colleges, they tend to be extraordinarily well prepared. What are we doing to encourage and inspire them to want to become the professors? I mean, the one question I always ask is, do you see anybody in biochemistry here looking like you? You know, I mean, quite frankly, do you see anybody who are in literature? I mean, or in whatever the disciplines? If not you, then who? So there are things we can all do to produce more. Our STRIDE program focuses on the idea that it will take faculty, with support from the administration, with faculty to take ownership of using best practices to bring in people, whether it's bringing postdocs in and giving them a chance to build the research and go to the faculty, or working with other kinds of institutions. We can do it. The mistake I think we often make is not to think about how you use faculty and staff together. Our Equity and Inclusion Council is chaired by one who's an attorney, a Black attorney, and the other who is LGBTQ Dean of Engineering, with faculty from all the disciplines. So we think about all kinds of inclusive excellence, right? It just seems to me that we can be far more creative, use that creative juice, those juices, to think broadly about how to produce more people for the professoriate and how to give support to all these people of color. Numbers may be small, but there are a lot of PhDs out there looking for homes. And the question is, how do we find ways of producing the best and getting them, attracting them to our campuses, and holding ourselves accountable?
So our time is starting to draw down towards the end, and I can't let you all go without raising one other critically important question of the day for all of us, I think, and to Phi Beta Kappa in particular, and that is the question of academic freedom and challenges to academic freedom in our time. I'm talking about things that are coming from boards of regents, that are coming from state legislatures, that are coming from governors, sometimes some private sources as well. A lot of the flashpoint has been around criticism of what's perceived to be critical race theory and critical race studies, but I think it's a broader issue than that. And so I'm afraid you're right, Freeman. Trying to get presidents to speak on a time budget is a real challenge. I am herding cats here, but this is kind of a lightning round. A couple of minutes from each of you, and let's go Sue, Gabi, Freeman in this order this time. Are we right to be worried about academic freedom? And what words of encouragement or advice would you give in terms of others on campuses and in our communities looking at challenges to academic freedom today?
Well, I'll try and be brief here. I mean, of course, we're coming out of a very anti-intellectual period of time in our country that I think has put pressure on this notion. But I also think that when we use the term academic freedom and we forget and responsibility, the original coining of the term academic freedom was academic freedom and responsibility, that we're leaving out an important point that we should all be modeling for our students, which is that they need to speak up and speak their minds, but also they're not absolved of the consequences of what they have to say. And we have lost the art of communicating across difference in this country, but our colleges, I think, can be really important stages for modeling and demonstrating that people of principle can hold different points of view, but can still communicate their disagreements in ways that don't involve vulgarity or threats of violence, and that there can be ways to find some common ground even when we have different ideological perspectives. But doing that requires not only that we support the freedom part, but that we remember the responsibility part, that we're responsible to be courteous, we're responsible to bring evidence to our arguments. You know, spouting off and calling people names is not courteous disagreement, but bringing evidence to your argument and really listening to what the other person has to say is something we all should be modeling and practicing every day. It's a muscle that you have to develop, and we need to all be in training about it all the time.
An important point that academic freedom and free expression are not two ways of saying the same thing. You have the right to say certain things under a basic theory of free expression. You may not wish to say all of those things as a matter of academic freedom. They may not be part of the academic enterprise. And so that relationship between academic freedom and free expression is one we're not going to do in a couple of minutes, but it's an important nuanced question. Gabi, your thoughts on this one?
I think Sue was right on everything she said. So I'll just add something very brief, which is that I'm deeply respectful of what my faculty colleagues have to say, and of the staff on campus who don't have the same guarantees of academic freedom, but they do have guarantees of freedom of expression, and the students who have academic freedom and freedom of expression. And that means that there's a fundamental inequality in many ways in our campuses that can lead to furtherance of tensions. That we have to remember that academic freedom is a certain kind of privilege. It's one that is earned and a condition of how we work. We also, though, as Sue says, have to model what it means to respectfully and disagree. And for me, respectful disagreement is not a shibboleth for going along to get along. And it's not a shibboleth for, bowing to the powerful or whatever interest is there. What I will say is I understand why all kinds of people are angry in America and around the world right now. And until we wrestle with that anger in ways that allow people to express it without, threatening people or violence, we're never going to get anywhere, because things are so broken for so many people that I understand why they're mad. And I think we need to start off a lot of our conversations saying, okay, this is a rough conversation. So let's together figure out the rules we're going to use to engage. And it's, there's some very simple ones. It's like all of our therapists and kindergarten teachers told us. Make I statements. Don't assume the worst. Speak to the idea, not the person. Don't make gratuitous insults. Try to leave it at the table and don't take it out with you. And all the time, treat someone with dignity and respect, even if they don't treat you. Now that's me. And that's a lot for a lot of people to deal with, especially if they're 18 and have been through a lot, or if they're 60 and have been through a lot. So I think it's the responsibility, more the responsibility of a lot of us as presidents to try and model that and to put ourselves in these discussions in ways where people are going to beat the stew out of us. Everyone on this call has had somebody, Lord of mercy, I won't even go into it. We get so much stuff, but we have to model it no matter how much we're hurting, because everyone on this call has gone home and cried. Every one of us. So we just have to take that humanity and try and share it.
Freeman, last word.
People often ask me what this term means, people from the outside, and I always tell them, just look it up, just see what it says. And let me read this. Academic freedom is a moral and legal concept expressing the conviction that the freedom of inquiry by faculty members is essential to the mission of the academy and to the principles of the academy. And I would certainly agree with that. The ability to seek the truth and to speak the truth, very important. But in line with my colleagues, our challenge is that people are viewing the truth differently. And we, based on the assumptions we make and our own experiences, what we see is the truth here may be very different here. We see that in other parts of the world. When I studied as an exchange student in Egypt, I would see the truth spoken very differently in Time and Newsweek from what I saw in magazines and journals in other parts of the country. So I think this notion of the freedom to inquire and to seek the truth must push us to think about building the spaces that my colleagues are talking about. We like to say we want to be able to agree to disagree agreeably with civility, because as soon as it becomes a heated argument like that, nobody is thinking critically. We are just trying to win the argument. Of all the things, what should the liberal arts should get us away from thinking about just winning the argument, but rather trying to understand the other's point of view and to seek the truth. That has to be the theme of all the things that we can say. Thank you.
The great Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who was also a professor before he went on the bench, and I will quickly add a member of Phi Beta Kappa, was one of the theoreticians of academic freedom, but he also had a somewhat grandiose expression he used in one of those academic freedom opinions where he described academics as priests of democracy. A little overblown, okay, but his point that it's not just for the sake of looking in, it's also for the sake of the essential connecting tissue of a self-governing people and a democracy, which we're all involved in on all of our campuses. Sue, Gabi, Freeman, thank you for your time, for your wisdom. I can tell you that the chat that came in, you blew people away. I knew that you would. I asked them to give us 2.5 hours. They wouldn't do it. They only gave us an hour. Thank you all for what you're doing. I wish you successful years ahead. I wish you safe years ahead. And I look forward to staying in touch and working together in the days and years ahead. God bless you all and good luck to you all.
These young presidents are amazing. Kudos to the next generation of presidents. You all are fabulous. Fabulous. Congratulations.
Those who have taught us and continue to. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Fred. Take
Great
care.
job.
Bye-bye.